Dr. Carson, you're a Yale man. I gotta ask, is there anything that you could tell me about the Skull and Bones Secret Student Society?
Well, going off to Yale was a real shock for me.
Hmm. Good morning, America. I'm Justus Smith with Proverbs Media Group, and today we have a very special, world-renowned, world-respected guest, the famous Dr. Ben Carson. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing very well. I'm delighted to be with you. It should be a fun time.
Absolutely. It's about to be the Kentucky Derby of all interviews. So, I want to start it off in a very lighthearted, easy place. Very simple question. Who runs the world?
Well, ultimately, the world is run by the good Lord. God is in control of everything. But he gives us broad latitude in terms of what we should do. One of the things that's very important to realize is that the United States of America is looked upon, or has been in the past, as a leader. And as a destiny for many people, as a goal, as a place to be. And we're in the process of giving up that position. I think that's very worrisome. And
That's exactly right.
We need to continue to look at the principles that were so important in our development. How did we go from a ragtag bunch of militiamen to the pinnacle of the world in record time? It was not by coincidence. It was because of things like our faith, which taught us to love your neighbor. Things like our love of liberty, understanding that giving people choices, giving them the ability to utilize their talents to benefit not only themselves, but their families and their communities. That was very different than having a king or a monarch or an overseer who decided what to do with your talents. And the sense of community. Our founders had a phrase, the common good. You saw that in many of their writings. It meant what's good for everybody, not just what's good for this group versus that group. We see a lot of pitting demographics against each other in our society today as we descend. We need to recognize that that's not the right way. That never leads to a good place. And then, our respect for life from the womb to the tomb, everybody's life. What an incredible bonus that was for us. And it really, I think, made us into a place that had a sense of morality.
Indubitably. That is very well said. I'd like to ask you, what is the role that the intelligence community plays in the power hierarchy of our country and internationally?
Well, they were supposed to play a role where they looked out for things that might be a threat to us. And that was primarily external influences that were not necessarily looking out for our well-being. However, more recently, our intelligence apparatus has been turned inwardly. You remember they were looking at Catholic families as potential terrorists. And, the things that they have aimed at those who are pro-life, these are not good things that are happening in our society right now. And it probably means that we need to reevaluate our leadership in the intelligence community and realign them with the original purposes of having an intelligence community. It's very important to have because there is evil in the world and you don't want to be blindsided by it. So you want to know what's going on, not only in your own country, but throughout the world. And you must keep an eye on it at all times. And that's what they're supposed to be doing, not being co-opted by political purposes.
Mm.
And unfortunately, we've allowed, politicization of intelligence, and that's very detrimental.
That's exactly right. It seems to me that our intelligence agencies have been ideologically subverted mutually by each other in an effort to destroy each other's countries. Our intelligence agency has bent the knee to foreign influences. Our intelligence agency is also invading other countries and ideologically subverting them as they subvert us. And it's become this game where it's heightening and radicalizing quickly, and the tools at their disposal are beyond the public's comprehension. The tools of mass manipulation through the media, with things like CIA Project Mockingbird, the things like weather manipulation, but I won't go all the way down the rabbit hole. It's a terrifying thing, truly. And
Well, it is terrifying, and I think it's a situation that has been largely ignored by the general populace and by the news media without realizing. If you look at Marxist countries, you look at communist countries, their intelligence is a huge part of who they are, and it's how they control and manipulate the population. We never want that situation to occur in this country, and we need to make sure we keep them pointed in the right direction.
that's exactly it. I completely agree. Now, switching gears only just a titch, I'm curious, what school of thought do you more so subscribe to? Are you more Platonic or Aristotelian?
Well, I'm neither, to be honest with you, because neither of those individuals were particularly oriented toward faith.
Mm.
They were much more oriented toward human intellect.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And not to say that they didn't have, some interesting writings. There's no question about that. Plato's allegory of the cave, things like that, the projection and how we perceive things. They had some very in-depth intellectual arguments, and they made a contribution to society. There's no question about that. But not to me personally.
I totally hear you.
I see to be much more oriented towards Scripture
Mm-hmm.
and what Scripture says and how it impacts my life.
Absolutely.
Philosophically, there's a lot of good stuff in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly if you look at the book of Proverbs, which was written by the wisest man who ever lived.
That's right.
Wiser than Aristotle,
Mm-hmm.
wiser than Plato, wiser than any of them, about almost all aspects of life, with the exception of women.
That's right. Oh, that's excellent.
Who can understand that?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. That might take us a while. So, one thing I've always wanted to ask you about, being that you're a good friend of Trump's and you've spent a great amount of time with him, and actually the first time I ever saw you in person was at a Trump rally. I know you must have some great Trump stories. Is there anything juicy or unexpected that you could tell us about?
Well, the thing that people should know about him is that the people who work for him, the people who work in the kitchen, the people who park the cars, they stay with him.
Mm-hmm.
They like him. He knows their name. He knows members of their family.
Mm.
Very different than the other person who's running for the presidency right now.
Yeah.
And just to show you what kind of person he is, when we were running against each other for the presidency in 2015, 2016,
Mm-hmm.
at one of the debates, my name was called, but I couldn't hear it because there was too much audience noise. And so I was standing there waiting for my name. The other candidates' names were called, and they gladly walked by me. Trump, on the other hand, came and stood there with me until they straightened up the situation. That's the person he is, and it really made an impression on me. And, we became friends. We began to recognize that philosophically, we were peas in a pod. We basically had the same ideals about everything. We had very different personalities, but that's a different story. But, later on when I decided to drop out, it was because I really didn't want to be president. And having somebody who had exactly the same ideals and philosophy who did want to be president, I said, this is a piece of cake. Easy one.
That's excellent. That is absolutely excellent. I've seen that clip online, and the first time I saw it, it really just, it got me going. It got me fired up. So I'm so glad that you were able to provide the insight from behind the scenes of what was happening there. That's absolutely amazing.
And I've heard lots of stories also about things that he's done for people that he didn't even know. Like, one man who stopped to help him fix a flat tire. It's just amazing. And, he's a guy who really doesn't have to pay attention to the little guys. And I think people can see that. People can sense that in him. And that's why, even though he's a billionaire, right at the top of society, a former president, people, the normal, everyday workers, they identify with him. Because he's not putting on airs. He really does care about them. And why would he run for president, to be honest with you? He was already a billionaire. Famous as anybody in the world. There wasn't really anything for him. I mean, there was a lot for him to lose. And I think a lot of people understand that.
I completely agree. I mean, my personal impression, having met him, was that he was someone that will give you that undivided attention, is very interested in people, is absolutely kind, and I have to admit, he's one of the funniest people I've ever listened to talk. This guy is on fire. He's just dropping one-liners after one-liners, and I love a good aphorism.
Well, he's quick on his feet.
yeah, absolutely.
And he's energetic. That's the part that I find so amazing. What an incredible blessing. I mean, the man is 78 years old. I'm 73, and I couldn't keep up with him. I don't know anybody who could really keep up with him. I mean, it's amazing. And, he has the kind of personality. A lot of people don't like it. They say, he's got good policies, I will admit that, but that personality of his, I just can't stand it. I just couldn't vote for someone like that. But, I have to ask those people, do you hate Trump more than you love your children?
That's a good one.
What about their future? Is that important? Or is it just your feelings that are important?
Right.
And if you were a patient and you had a fatal disease that could only be cured with excellent surgery, would you rather have the surgeon with a poor bedside manner who saves everybody, or the guy with the sweet words who kills everybody?
That's good. That's really good.
We have to stop and think about these things.
Right.
And I think a lot of people are starting to think about them as we get closer to the election.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that is so well put. And to the people that their main detractor of Trump is his personality, I think that's the craziest part, because that's one of my favorite parts. I think the guy is amazing, so.
Well, he has a New York, Manhattan real estate personality. That's a dog-eat-dog world.
That's right.
If you've ever tried driving in New York City, if you're very polite and you just let everybody go, you will never get anywhere. You'll be in the same spot 10 hours later.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So, Dr. Carson, you're a Yale man. I gotta ask, is there anything that you could tell me about the Skull and Bones Secret Student Society?
Well, going off to Yale was a real shock for me. Because, having grown up in dire poverty, without exposure to a lot of things, And there I go into the dining room, and there's real silver
Yeah.
and oriental rugs on the floor and original paintings on the wall. And
Right.
I mean, it was a real shock to the system for. But yes, they did have the societies. I would never have been invited to one of them because they were mostly upper echelon society type people.
Well, they missed out.
But I wouldn't have been interested anyway, to be honest with you, because it goes back to what I was saying earlier about Plato and Socrates. My orientation was toward God, toward faith. And those are the things that for the secret societies really didn't mean a whole lot. So I don't have anything against them having secret societies. The Masons, all of these people, they can do what they want to do. I don't have any problem with it. I'm just not particularly inclined to be a part of it. We have to recognize that we live in a country where one of the strengths is the freedom of association. So you should be able to associate with whoever you want to. You should be able to form whatever clubs you want. As long as they're not overtly formed for the purpose of harming other people. And so societies, party away, enjoy your lives. I will say that, Skull and Bones and some of those secret societies, they help each other. So like if you're part of that society and then you go to the big city and you need a hand up, they do help each other. And some people say, well, that's unfair. I don't know that it's unfair. People help each other. People have organizations, people have clubs, people have neighborhood societies. And, you're much more inclined to do something for your neighbor than you are for an absolute stranger.
That's right.
By the same token, you're much more inclined to do something for somebody who belongs to an organization that you belong to than you are for a total stranger. It's okay. Don't be offended because somebody else has that advantage. I grew up knowing that a lot of people had advantages, and there were a lot of people who were talking against them. And just like right now, we have a lot of people who talk against the rich. Those people get all the advantages and they don't pay their fair share. There's somebody who's running for president right now who's always talking about the rich don't pay their fair share. Well, but they will never tell you what their fair share is. They won't tell you that the top 1% pays 30% of the federal taxes. Is that fair?
Right.
And if you didn't have those people, guess what you wouldn't have? You wouldn't have developed areas. You wouldn't have arenas and stadiums. You wouldn't have convention centers.
That's right.
Big hospitals. You wouldn't have any of them. You'd be sitting around the campfire singing Kumbaya. So, we really have to stop and think about these things before we complain too much.
Absolutely. I completely agree. I think that there's such a breed of resentment that has come about, especially between the lower classes, the bourgeoisie, and the elites, where I think that what would be more noble of people who are aspiring to rise up the social ladder is to study those super elite and super successful people and to understand what mechanisms are at play, what kind of groups they might be a part of, what kinds of things that they are doing different that are attributing to their success to lead toward a positive epistasis, epigenetics, these kinds of things. I think that it's so important that we take note and not look at the superficial things, because I think one of the biggest problems we see today is that a lot of young people will look up to, for example, a rapper or a singer, and that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But they're taking the superficiality of what actually led to their success, which is they think it might be the image. They see their favorite artist wearing Louis Vuitton, so they say, oh, if I wear this, maybe I'll be as successful. But that wasn't what contributed directly to their success. There was a lot of underlying things involving networking, discipline, timing, and frankly, I don't know if I should call it luck, but I think we both know it's God.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely. And, when I think about it, organizations like the one that I head up, American Cornerstone Institute,
Mm-hmm.
Has grown very rapidly. The programs have grown rapidly, including Little Patriot program, where we teach the children everything about who we are as a nation, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But there's a lot more good than there is bad and ugly. But at least half of our support comes from very wealthy Americans who want to make sure that we pass on those values and principles to the next generation.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not getting anything from it, but they are forking over hundreds of thousands, in some cases millions of dollars, so that these kinds of programs can flourish.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing with the Carson Scholars Fund, the same thing with many nonprofits who contribute greatly to our society. Those places, those organizations would not exist without very wealthy individuals who feel an obligation to do something.
Mm.
You look at how effective after Hurricane Helene the rescue efforts were on behalf of the private sector. And individuals like Franklin Graham, who started Samaritan's Purse,
Mm-hmm.
think about what they were able to do in terms of being able to save lives. These are people with resources.
Mm-hmm.
They could spend all of that on themselves. They could buy an extra yacht or an extra private plane, but instead they're giving.
That's right.
America is one of the most philanthropic nations on the earth.
Mm-hmm.
The last place where we should be having class warfare.
Mm.
Having grown up in dire poverty myself,
Mm.
I certainly appreciated some of the wealthy people that my mother worked for as a domestic, cleaning their houses. And she would show them my report card and stuff, and they would be so proud, as almost if I was their own child.
Oh.
And they would send money, and they say, hey, congratulations, I just want you to have this. I remember that very, very vividly. But more importantly, I remember, something that you said, studying those individuals
Mm-hmm.
and figuring out what made them successful and recognizing that the pathway to that kind of success was available to me too.
Mm-hmm.
I could sit around and complain about not having things, or I could follow that pathway. And it has worked extremely well.
That's right. That's exactly it. And I completely admire your journey. I mean, you have accomplished something that's never been done before. I just want to touch on it briefly, and please forgive me if I title it incorrectly, but you performed the first ever craniovagus separation, which was the performance of a surgery to separate Siamese twins connected or conjoined at the back of their heads, correct?
That's correct.
That is unreal.
That was a particularly difficult thing to do because they were joined at the confluence of sinuses, where all the blood flow comes through. And what would happen in the past is when people tried to deal with that area, the patients would bleed to death. They would think, and there was no way to control it. And you'd try all kinds of little snaps and sewing techniques, but you just couldn't control it because the flow of pressure was too great. And, it was interesting because I had developed this interest in conjoined twins. And I was reading a lot about what had happened in the past, and I was thinking, if only there was some way to keep them from bleeding to death. And I was talking to a friend of mine who's the chief of cardiothoracic surgery at Hopkins, And I was saying, you guys operate on the hearts of little babies. How do you keep them from bleeding to death? And he told me about a new technique in which they would cool the body temperature until the heart stopped, pump all the blood out. They could use saline-like fluids to pump through the system. But by keeping the metabolism very low with the cold temperatures, the cells survive, and they can survive for up to an hour in the brain. And I was thinking, wow, if you could use that technique when you got to that critical part where the sinuses join together. And then I said, why am I thinking about this? I'm never going to see a set of twins like that. Lo and behold, 3 weeks later, there they were. And so I started explaining to the team the concept that I thought about. And, fortunately, I happened to be at a place like Johns Hopkins where you have the best of the best.
Mm-hmm.
I started putting together a team, studying what would need to be done in order to use a technique like that. And, the rest is history.
Wow.
But I want you to think back to, why was I ready with that? Obviously, the good Lord was preparing me for what he wanted me to do.
Amen. It is mind-blowing, truly. I mean, you are absolutely brilliant. Total legend. And I hope you know that. And I'm sure you've been told this plenty.
Well, I will say that I was wise enough to recognize who's in charge.
Oh, yes, sir. That's right.
And the other thing is, God actually has a sense of humor.
Yes, he does. The celestial comedian himself.
Absolutely, because, I had a horrible temper as a young person. And one day I tried to stab someone. And they had a large metal belt buckle under their clothing, and the knife blade struck with such force that it broke. And of course, they were terrified, but I was more terrified than they were, because I realized I was trying to kill somebody. I had turned things around academically. I was a straight A student. But I realized with a temper like that, my options were jail, reform school, or the grave. I was going to become a doctor. And, I just prayed about it and contemplated. And I picked up a Bible and started reading from the book of Proverbs. And there were all these verses about anger in there. Like Proverbs 19:19, there's no point in getting an angry man out of trouble because he's just going to get right back into it. But, there were also inspiring verses like Proverbs 16:32, mightier is the man who can control his temper than the man who can conquer a city. There are all these verses about fools also, and they all seem to be written about me. And but that was the day. From that day forward until this very day, I start and end every day reading from the book of Proverbs. Now, here's the part that's really cool. My middle name is Solomon. And Solomon,
I like that.
First wrote the book of Proverbs.
That's right.
Does that tell you that God sort of chuckles at these things? But even more funny than that was when Solomon became the king of Israel. Do you remember the thing that he did that made him very famous very early on?
What did he do?
2 women came to him claiming the same baby. And what did he advocate? He said, divide the baby. Isn't that when I became very well known, when I divided babies?
Oh, wow. Now that's quite the connection there. I like that.
He has a sense of humor. He really does.
Wow. Oh, that just blew my mind. You got me good with that one. That is good.
Yeah.
Oh, that's incredible.
Well, he does amazing things all the time. Sometimes we just don't spend time studying what he's actually done in our lives.
That's right. That's very right. Now, I'm very curious. A man with your intellect and skill and background, what is your favorite music? What do you listen to?
I love classical music.
Yes.
And, I sort of developed that love when I was in high school because I wanted to be a contestant on a television program
Mm.
called GE College Bowl. It came on every Sunday, and they pitted two colleges against each other and asked questions about science and math, history, geography, all these things. I was really good in all that stuff. But they also asked classical art and classical music.
Mm.
Know anything about that. So I taught myself because I wanted to be a contestant on that program. And I began to really enjoy the music.
Mm.
And it really was instrumental in my life, no pun intended, uh, because my wife is a classical violinist
Wow.
and also plays piano and a number of instruments. And when we were both from Detroit, but we had to go to New Haven to Yale to meet each other. I knew that she was an instrumentalist, and the church that I was going to needed an organist. So I asked her, would she like to try out for organist at the church? She said yes. And she ended up actually singing in the choir, and we got to know each other. And, next year's our 50th wedding anniversary.
Oh, congratulations.
So he worked that one out too. But it was the music that was the thing that brought us together.
Mm.
And it's very relaxing for me. When I operated, I was always playing classical music.
Mm.
All the residents knew when they did their pediatric neurosurgery rotation that they would also learn classical music. And it was very calming and relaxing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Classical music has such a special property to it. These great masters who had came up with all these different scales, basically the laws, the mathematical principles of interval distances, all of these things. It's absolutely brilliant what they were able to put together. And I got to ask, are you more like sorry.
Particularly someone like Bach.
Yes, there you go.
So prolific.
Yes.
Thousands of pieces of music. And he wrote the same thing up in the corner of each piece.
Mm-hmm.
To the glory of God.
That's right. That's right.
Amazing. He was also prolific in other ways. He had 21 children.
Wow. Busy man.
Exactly.
Oh, that's very good. So, switching gears only slightly, I am curious, how can one restore the integrity of the family without extending government overreach?
That's a very good question. Our country is very powerful. It's too powerful to be brought down militarily. So those who are looking for a one world government don't have an option. However, you can bring us down from inside. You can go to the very basic building block of society, and that is the family. And you can see that there's been an attack on the family. We are not getting married as much anymore. We have easy divorce, no fault divorce. We're not producing children. The average birth per woman in 1960 was 3.6. Now it's 1.6. 2.1 just to maintain the population. So you can see our families falling apart. You turn the television on, within 5 or 10 minutes, they introduce an alternative to the traditional nuclear family, making it not only acceptable, but maybe even preferable. That's what our kids are seeing. That's what they're growing up with. The heroes in the movies, forget about marriage. They're bed hopping one to another bed, and that's cool. And that's what we're presenting to our children. Can government do anything about that? Yeah, they can stop insinuating themselves. Just let the families develop. You have government programs in our school system that advocate for certain types of philosophies. And really, that should be a familial responsibility. What you believe in, your faith, gender issues, all of that, that should be in the purview of the family. That should not be a government entity, and yet it has progressively become just that. Government just needs to know to butt out and, do those things that promote development of families in terms of tax policies and things of that nature. Make it something that people are not penalized for. And I think you will see an improvement. There have been some other countries that had some real issues with population that have instituted some programs that incentivize people to form families, and it seems to be working. We need to be thinking about our long-term future and the policies and what impact that they have on them.
Exactly. I completely agree. Now, another big problem that I see going forward, particularly with our country, what do we do as Americans to combat the spread and growth of BRICS?
Yeah, well, first of all, for people who don't know, that would be an acronym for a number of countries who have formed an alliance. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa were the first ones, so that's why they get to be letters in the... But, there have been a number of others who have joined recently. And, they're looking to see how they can form alliances that will help them with trade, with self-defense, with a number of different things. And I don't know that we necessarily need to be trying to halt that or to stop it. But it would be useful if we had the kind of leadership in our country that people respected, so that they didn't feel that they had to form all of these other kinds of alliances. If we were true to our allies and they didn't have to worry about whether we were going to pull support from them, there wouldn't be a temptation for them to want to join other types of organizations. So we need to look very carefully at the kind of leadership that we place at the helm of our country. Right now, we're kind of the laughing stock of the world. And we have leaders that don't seem to understand the domino effect of things that they do. For instance, you look at our energy policies. Yes, we're producing a lot of petroleum and natural gas. We're sort of in a maintenance phase. But we should be ramping it up tremendously. We should be the world's number one producer of liquid natural gas and petroleum. I mean, we have oil reserves that are at least equivalent to Saudi Arabia. And, this is not to say that green energy isn't good, that, renewable and sustainable energy aren't good goals. They are, because at some point, we may have to switch over. But, that's at least a century or two away. And what we should be doing is using what we have to get what we want. Not sort of putting a cap on it, because who gets hurt by that? The poor people, the people who don't have money, who, are hurt every time they go to the gas station and they have to shell out $50, $60, $70, $80, $90 to fill their tank. For people who have lots of money, that doesn't mean anything. But for a lot of people, that hurts. And then that also is related to the food prices, because our energy policies have driven up the cost of the gasoline, which drives up the cost of transporting goods from the farm to the store. And there's a domino effect of everything. It drives inflation. Again, who gets hurt by that? The little man.
Mm-hmm.
The normal working man who had dreams and hopes of maybe buying a home, but now is just trying to survive. And we're putting a real damper on the American dream by having people in place who just don't understand those domino effects. And those domino effects also affect our security issues, because we are basically empowering Putin and his petroleum by not producing and having the rest of the world be relying on us rather than relying on him.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, what we're doing with Iran, allowing them to utilize their petroleum resources to gain a lot of money. In the previous administration, during Trump's years, they were starving for money because of the policies that we utilized. And now we've given them so much money, which is why they can finance Hezbollah and Hamas and all of the terrorist groups. So again, those domino effects, we have to have leadership that understands that and is strong and courageous and willing to be that beacon of light and hope. And if it's there, then you're not going to have BRICS or any other kind of organizations growing.
That's right. That was very well put. Thank you so much for explaining that. I mean, that is the full spectrum right there. Foreign policy, energy, how these things are interrelated, how these things can impact, either deter or promote wars, foreign or domestic. I mean, that was very spot on.
Good.
I want to ask, what in your life would you consider your greatest accomplishment?
Well, that's a very good question. Probably being a father.
That's a very good answer.
A lot of people think, well, you were a brain surgeon, you were the HUD secretary, you've done this, you've produced these books, but God gives us the privilege of being parents and raising that precious life, and to become a productive citizen and to contribute to their society. And there is no greater responsibility than that. All the other things help with that. But I say that with the hope that people who maybe don't have a PhD or a prestigious job know that they still have one of the most important responsibilities that exists in humanity, and that is to raise that child and to provide the right kind of environment and the right kind of examples for that child. What a difference it makes.
Mm-hmm.
And, I take someone like my mother. She grew up in rural Tennessee, a very large family, shuffled from home to home, never really had a place to call home, got less than a third grade education, got married when she was 13 years old, and then years later discovered that her husband was a bigamist and had to raise us by herself. But she was one of the greatest people that I've ever known. She was very wise. She believed in God, and she truly believed in education and how important it would be for both my brother and me to get the kind of education that would free us to be successful in this society. And one of the greatest pleasures of my life was when things became easy for me financially, to be able to make her life easy. I always made sure she had a new car, that she could travel around the world, that she had lots of money, she could do anything she wanted. But she did that by becoming a wonderful parent, not necessarily by getting a PhD. Although I will tell you, she did get an honorary PhD.
Oh, wow.
She taught herself to read. She got her GED.
Mm-hmm.
She went to college, and she also got an honorary PhD.
That's fantastic. And always paired with accomplishment, I am curious, what would you consider your greatest regret?
Greatest regret would be not studying as hard as I should have. Even though I did okay, I could have done better.
Wow. And you've done very well.
I've been blessed. There's no question about that. But could I have known more about molecular biology? Could I have studied a little harder and maybe discovered something more that would have benefited mankind? Or when I was playing table soccer, maybe I could have been a little more studious. So that would be my greatest regret. Having said that, I am very pleased with the way my life came out, and the blessings that the Lord bestowed upon me. But He can always bestow more if we put ourselves in a position to receive them.
Mm-hmm. Now, let's say you had a time machine and you could go back to when you were a child and tell yourself one thing. What info would you want to pass off to him?
I would say learn how you learn, because everybody learns in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
And, again, things worked out well for me, but they could have been even better if I had learned earlier how I learned. When I got to medical school, I said, the last hurdle has been overcome. And I'm actually going to realize my dream of becoming a doctor. But on that first set of comprehensive exams, 6 weeks into the first semester, I did terribly. And in fact, I was so bad that I was sent to see my counselor. And he looked at my record. He said, "You seem like a very intelligent young man. I bet there are a lot of things you could do outside of medicine." And he encouraged me to drop out of medical school. He said, "You're not cut out to be a doctor. You're going to torment yourself and everybody else. And we can find an area that would be more appropriate for you and help you get into another program." I was devastated. All my life, since I was 8 years old, I was planning on being a doctor. I finally get into medical school, and the person supposed to help me says drop out. Devastation. But I prayed for wisdom. And I started thinking, what kind of courses have you always done well in? And I realized I did well in courses where I did a lot of reading. And what kind of courses have you struggled in? And I realized I struggled in courses where I listened to a lot of boring lectures, because I don't get anything out of boring lectures. Nothing. Zero. And I was sitting in 6 hours worth of them every day. So I just made an executive decision to skip the boring lectures and to spend that time reading. And the rest of medical school was a snap after that. And years later, when I came back to my medical school as the commencement speaker, I was looking for that counselor, because I was going to tell him he wasn't cut out to be a counselor. Because just so negative all the time. But what I discovered, obviously, was that what worked for me, particularly in learning lots of material, was reading and repetition. And I had flashcards. I made flashcards for everything that I needed to know. I was always carrying them around in my pocket. My second year in medical school, I lived with my brother, who was in the School of Engineering, and he even knew all the bacteria and what they were sensitive to, because I always had these cards out talking about it. But, I discovered what worked for me. And the earlier people discover what works for them, the better they're going to do. Mm-hmm. The more fun they're going to have doing it.
That's right. And on the note of education, I'm curious what your thoughts on education reform are. I see so many issues today with a lack of proper training. Some of these teachers are unqualified at the K through 12 level. Even some of these professors should not be professors. We have people with tenures who are having their degrees taken from them. You look at what happened to Jordan Peterson, and I have a number of friends that are professors who have had the same thing happen to them. I won't say their names, but hey guys, it's a terrible thing that's happened, how our academia has been ideologically subverted and turned into a weapon that I think is breeding this kind of Ouroboros that feeds into itself, where the intelligence agencies are getting these ideas from the academics, and the academics are then influencing policy. But I want to know what your thoughts are on education reform.
Well, you're exactly right. The key thing is that we need to have choice. If we give people choice in education, the problem will solve itself. Because people will migrate, obviously, to the things that work. But so many just don't have that choice. And keep in mind, it was Vladimir Lenin, who said, "Give me your children to teach for 4 years, and the seed that I sow will never be uprooted." Indoctrination, that's what it's all about. And that's how people can control our nation. That's how they can fundamentally change our nation, through our children. So this is not a small issue that you're talking about. This is our future. How do we train our children? What kind of educational system do we provide for them? Do we provide the best for all of our children, or are only the elitists allowed to have the best? Where are we going to put our emphasis? And it makes all the difference in the world.
And that's a very difficult thing. I've done some research personally into social mobility, and I've found that certain social programs that exist within Europe that allow free education to the entire population don't result in positive social mobility, where the lower and middle classes are actually increasing their net worth. What happens is that when education becomes available to everyone, it actually lowers the threshold or the actual prestige associated to those degrees. So I think it's such a tricky thing, because on one end, I'm like, everyone should be able to have access to Plato and Nietzsche and philosophy and science and all of this stuff. But on the other end, when we democratize education, there is a lessering of the prestige. So it's a tricky tango there, truly.
There's no question about it. And it's going to get even trickier in the future with the addition of AI and virtual reality. If we use them the right way, it can be extremely good. But if we use them in the wrong way, it's going to be very, very detrimental.
That's right. I am not looking forward to living in the Matrix. Yeah. So if you had the opportunity to broadcast a message to the entire world, everyone would stop what they're doing and listen to exactly what you're about to say. What message would you want to impart to them?
We are not enemies. W-A-N-E. Wayne.
That's right.
And, we've for such a long time let hatred and division wax. It's time to let it wane right now. And why is it that we cause ourselves all these problems? Mankind, have you noticed throughout history, they just can't leave other people in peace. They got to mess with them. They got to destroy their lives. They got to control them. If we could stop doing that and just saying, I have certain talents, I'm going to utilize them for myself and my family and my community. You have certain talents, I appreciate those. And, we can trade off things. And, I don't have to, because I have a certain talent, dominate you or destroy you. What an incredible message that would be for the whole world. We don't have to be fighting each other. It's just not necessary. It's a choice that we make, and we can make the opposite choice.
Absolutely. That would have such a profound impact on the minds of billions if we could all share in that message. I think that is
there is such a thing as evil.
Yeah.
And evil grabs people and it makes them do things that don't make sense.
That's right. And on the note of the world and on the note of evil, I have one very important question for you, Dr. Carson. If you had, and this is just a thought experiment, if you were given unchecked power, you become the grand pontificate leader, triple prince king of the universe, what would you want to do with your unchecked power?
Well, I would not want to have unchecked power.
Good answer.
because you have to have unchecked wisdom. Power. And the source of all wisdom is God.
Amen.
So he's the only one who should have unchecked power, because the rest of us would make a mess of anything. We would think we were doing well. But you have to recognize that even in our society right now, there are people who believe that they are righteous and that they know what's best for everybody else. You take the radical jihadist. Anyone who disagrees with them is an infidel.
Mm-hmm.
And, you have the right to do anything to rid the world of infidels or to change them. But we have some people in American society now who are sort of adopting a similar philosophy. Anybody who doesn't agree with them, they're just ignorant people. They don't really know what's good for them. And we really need to lay down the mandates so that they will do what's really best for them. They just don't know it. We have that kind of philosophy developing in our own country right now. We have to be very wary of it, because that's not the reason that we became such a successful nation.
Precisely. Now, we've covered a lot of ground in this interview. Over the past hour, we've talked about the CIA, we've talked about secret societies, medical procedures, the Matrix, a lot of good stuff here. Yes, I like to always round things off on a very positive note, something a little more lighthearted, maybe to inculcate some bit of faith and hope into our viewers, bring them a little joy and fun, to distract them from all of the despotism and dysgenic drift that's occurring in the world. So I'd like to play a game with you, if you wouldn't be opposed to it, called Describe Them in One Word.
Okay.
Now, if you can't contain the person in one word, that's totally okay. We can always go into a little more depth on all of these people.
All
so
right.
I'd like to start with Donald Trump.
Patriotic.
Absolutely. Kamala Harris.
Puppet.
Bill Gates.
Arrogant.
Elon Musk.
Genius.
Kanye West.
Controversial.
Oh, yeah. Andrew Tate.
He's controversial too.
Oh, yeah. Jeffrey Epstein.
Evil.
Yes. George Soros.
More evil.
Klaus Schwab.
Self-centered.
That's right. Alex Jones.
Controversial but smart.
Yes, I agree. Tucker Carlson.
Courageous.
Charlie Kirk.
Smart.
Oscar Wilde.
Forward thinking.
Nietzsche.
Very philosophical.
Charles Darwin.
Wrong.
And my personal favorite of them all, Elaine Beck.
Philanthropical.
Yes, absolutely. Dr. Ben Carson, it has been a wonderful pleasure and honor to be able to interview you and speak to you today. Thank you so much for coming to Proverbs Media Group, and God bless you.
Thank you so much for having me, and may God bless Proverbs Media Group. You guys are doing a great job.
Thank you.